Welcome to Lesson 13, our Combination Project 1. Today, we are going to draw an apple. But first, let's review what we've learned that applies directly to this lesson. We can see light and dark. When we draw, we show highlights and shadows. Don't be afraid to mark. Wrong marks help us find right marks. Now, highlights change into shadows, sometimes suddenly and sometimes slowly. Cast shadows will help your drawing seem more real. You can see a little bit of a cast shadow from this angle here and also on our apple. Cast shadows help your drawing seem more real. Okay. Today, before we begin, we are going to take a good amount of time to observe closely this apple. So look with me. The shape of the apple is almost a sphere, but not really, not quite. The differences I notice right off the bat are that the apple is wider at the top than at the bottom. And so while we could all, draw kind of a sphere or a circle to achieve its shape, we would want it to appear wider at these parts. It dips down in the middle, and then it's thinner at the base, and there's a little dip upward. There's a dip here and a dip here. I find that very interesting, and that will help us as we draw the shape. The stem shape is almost a cylinder. It is wider at the top than at the base, though, but the shading is cylindrical shading, so we will easily be able to achieve the cylinder shape of the stem. Also, it's not straight, is it? It is bent a little off to the side. So both of these, we can start with the shape of a sphere and the shape of a cylinder. They are slightly distorted, and that means it's misshapen from the true form of a sphere or a cylinder, okay? So we would call them distorted. Now, let's observe our shading. In this picture, light is coming from the right. See, the cast shadow is to the left because the light source is striking the apple at this direction. I see many midtones in this apple. Very few highlights. There's some like lighter, a little bit lighter here, very light here, maybe some light here, and then only a few darks. We have some dark on the stem, at the base of the stem, inside that little divot in the apple. We have it underneath the apple is very dark, and kind of some of these edges. Those are our darkest spots. But mostly it's full of midtones, and they vary. There's some lighter midtones and some darker midtones, but mostly it's midtones. I also noticed that the cast shadow is different than the cast shadows we've worked with so far. This one is very light on its edges. It doesn't have the harsh outline as most of the cast shadows we have worked with have had. We would call that like a gradient. So it goes from dark, lighter to light, and it's imperceptible. There is no line of where that happens. I actually see that softer transitions from light to dark all over this apple, and I think that's why it seems that there's so much midtone. And I think this is due to using a diffused light source. A diffused light source is when an object, a sheet, clouds, something is blocking the direct light, and it causes the lighting to become softer. And so you have less harsh outlines of shadows and highlights. I do see one area of harsh, and that is this shiny spot. Because of the harshness of the highlight, that is how our brains go, oh, that's a shiny apple. And so we will want to achieve the harsher edges around this highlight in order to help our drawing look like it's a shiny apple. So in this image, I used a window light and it was a cloudy day. So that's how we achieved a diffused lighting source. All right, now that we have observed, which, by the way, practice observing carefully and it will help you draw well. Observing is the very first step to becoming a great artist. Let's clear our workspace. Well, those are the things you need today. Tortillon, chamois, kneaded eraser, and charcoal. Okay, so make sure you have your objects or your materials like I do. We begin with a toned ground. Today, make your toned ground a little bit lighter since the apple was photographed on a light surface. I'm not gonna make mine too dark because notice how much darker the apple appears than this background. Okay, I have my toned ground. Now let's use charcoal to block in the apple shape. Again, we're using the idea of a sphere, but we are going to distort it a little. And this is when you need to not be afraid to mark. Okay, so I'm gonna start with kind of this sphere idea, knowing I have these kind of almost like a heart, right? The two top edges are a little bit broader and then it's gonna get narrow. I also chose to do my apple over here so I have enough space for a cast shadow. So keep in mind your composition. So here I'm making a lot of wrong marks, mostly wrong, trying to begin refining the shape of my apple. My eyes are flicking back and forth between my apple and my drawing. I noticed that these bottom edges have a slight straightness to them, right? A sphere is a perfect circle, but this apple is not. And I'm gonna try to get the little divot in on the bottom. Good, I'm happy with that. I have a very subtle dip up here. Perhaps I'll go in with my finger and smudge this so I can refine it a little better. Okay, keeping that, I'm good with it. Let's do the stem. We'll just use 2 lines basically, but stroke, stroke, right? Stroke, stroke, making wrong marks to find the right ones. Charcoal is forgiving and it will disappear as you draw. Okay, so there we go. Since I've drawn my stem now, I am going to go ahead and add a little line behind it to keep in my own mind that there is this dip in the front of the stem. See the overlapping here? We have the front of the apple, the stem is behind it, and the back of the apple is behind that. Overlapping is a very powerful tool when it comes to drawing, and you must observe your overlaps carefully. I am noticing my apple seems taller and much broader than this. This is much closer to a sphere. So I'm gonna just soften part of it and see if I can fix it a little. Again, that's only because I noticed, right? I'm observing and now I can alter my drawing to try and make it more precise. Done. So quick. You don't be afraid to make marks, okay? Now, we've got our apple shape, our stem shape. Let's approximate our shadow. I see here's the bottom of my apple, right? It's up the side a little over here, so that's where I'll kind of start. And then it's kind of like a pointed shape, but it's not because of the gradient, right? So I'm only blocking in sort of what I see. There we go. Fill it in. Okay, and that's not what it looks like, is it? It's a gradient. So I'm going to come in with my finger and diffuse it, soften it, see how I like it. Notice I'm continuing to work it. Do I like it? Something it looks like it's going down too much at an angle. Can you see that? It almost looks like it's on a sloped hill. So I'm going to bring it up this way a little. and work the gradient. Here we go. I like it. That'll do for now. I might see something in it later that I say, oh, that's not quite right. And then I can come back in and fix it. Now, we've done our shape and shadow, shape and shading. We've also softened the shadow. Let's fill in the shading for the apple's shadows, midtones, and highlights. We're gonna start with some of the darkest spots. Notice how I'm not going to blend everything right away. Okay, so I see this really big deep shadow here, and it comes kind of down a little bit. And then there's some at the base here. And a lot of this is midtones, so I'm gonna connect those deep shadows. Okay, that looks pretty good, I guess. Bring this over more. I see like a stripe of midtone or shadow back there. This is all midtone. So I keep rotating. When I want it dark, I kind of push the charcoal down to a point, and then if I want midtones, I'm laying it out. This helps me draw faster as well. Okay, I see up here, this is kind of midtone too, but it's a little bit lighter midtone than down here, so I'm not pressing very hard. Oh, look at this shadow. I almost forgot about him. He's a super deep, dark shadow that goes all the way to the front edge. Now I'm using a precise edge of my piece of charcoal, and I'm gonna slowly fill in that little shadow. And I see it kind of pulls over the edge a little. Good enough. Okay, there's that. I got my big highlight here. So I'm gonna try and mostly leave that open for now. All right, I think I'm happy with that. My next step is going to be tortillon. I'm gonna start in my darks and start smoothing everything and blending it so it has a softness to it, really achieving the gradients that I see in my image. Oh, let's point out here, my shadow on mine comes down like a deep slide, like a curve. Here, it's kind of short, and then it goes a little bit straight. So I'm gonna fix that, add some more dark. And that's the advantage of constantly looking back at your source. Oh, look, I left a big light chunk down here that's not in the original. So I'm gonna just come in and darken that up. Cool. As I get to detailed places, I use the tip of my tortillon. Okay, I blocked everything in. Now it's all nice and blended together. I'm gonna tap some of the transitions if I don't like how harsh they are. The edges, soften them with my finger. And good. Okay, so we've blocked in shadows, midtones, and highlights on the apple. Okay, and it's not exact, but that's okay. Now, those harsh lines on that reflection, this bright spot, that is important, like I said, for making our brain understand that it's shiny. So make sure that you don't lose those harsh edges. And mine is a little bit too bright. I see some imperfections and a really soft gradient here. I'm gonna lighten that to a softer midtone. Blend in this little chunk, refine it with my eraser. All right. I might come back to that later. With my eraser, I'm going to add in a couple more highlights. I see this edge. I can tell it has a little bit of a lighter area on it. Adding back in my background a little bit so that we can see. it fades into dark, so I'm gonna get my darks back and use my tortillon to blend those together. Okay, good enough. The front of the apple up here is just ever so slightly bright. It looks like I preserved that pretty well, but it's not that light. That light is almost this, so I'm gonna go and darken it. The whole thing, but so gently blend it in. Okay. Once you change something, pause and look back and forth to make sure it's working. Now I'm just gonna go in and barely tap to bring some highlight in. All right, I'm happy with that. The stem needs to be filled in with its values. The top of the stem, the wide part, is very dark. And then at an angle, we end up getting the highlight as it appears kind of around and curving. The dark and the light help us see the shape of the cylinder here. And so that's all we need is the dark and the light. The light will stand out most against the shadows down inside the crevice of the apple. You can see it kind of blends just ever so slightly with my background, but that's okay. That got too dark. Tap, tap, tap. I hope me walking you through exactly how I would draw a thing is actually helpful. Because, you know, getting into the mind of an artist, it can be, or it can be distracting. So make sure, you know, the core of it is observe and copy, observe and copy, observe and copy. My highlight, the little divot in the apple here is too dark, so I'm gonna just soften it. And the edges here, I'm just gonna streak them a little with my tortillon, make them a little messier. Oh, that's much better. I like what that did. Now, we've got the shading for our apple, we've got the shading for our stem. Our last step is to deepen the darkest darks, okay? And so the darkest darks I see are the very edge of the apple up here. I hope you can already tell how that affected the drawing. I also can see that I missed some of the darks behind the stem on the left side, inside the divot. So I'm gonna add those and darken the edge, bottom edge of that divot. For my brain, these darks are bringing the whole apple to life. And so I encourage you to make sure you get it. I'm seeing a line of shadow that kind of goes here that I feel like I missed. So I'm gonna just add that back in. It connects down. I can see this is a little lighter, so I'm gonna use my finger, take that away. Good, good, good. I love this. It's so much fun. Here's a little highlight that I missed at the very back edge of the apple. Again, these little details, this is what is gonna make your drawing feel lifelike, is the final details. The edge here is so undefined. I'm gonna make sure that it has a real edge, not just the idea of an edge. Okay, ta-da. Now, more darks down here underneath the apple, not the base of the apple, but the underneath that little divot is so dark. Okay, make sure it's looking good. And here I lose pretty much all the detail in my drawing. I'm going to continue that dark line though, just because I think it will look nice. and you have the freedom to do that. Now, I see a bunch of little dots. I'm not gonna add those. If you'd like to, you can take the time to gently use your pointed tip of your eraser and add dots one by one. Be very gentle. Less is more because the brain will perceive that pattern so quickly. And so you can always add more, but it's hard to, actually, no, charcoal is not hard to go backwards, is it? That's the whole point. That's why it's so wonderful. Last detail I notice is that the apex of this dark shadow is actually all the way at the tippity top of this. And so I'm gonna just add that, blend it out a scotch with my tortillon. And there we have a basic apple. Thank you for joining lesson 13, and I hope you have fun drawing your own apple.